That's why it's the perfect sub album. It's like such a dehumanizing experience where it's just like,
really
is shit. Everyone is shit. I'm just so mad all the time. But
that makes perfect sense.
Yes.
If you start screaming the lyrics of this album on a subway, I'm pretty sure that's ending up on Twitter.
Yeah, look, not that I haven't, but anyway, the album
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Indieheads podcast. I am your host, Matty, at Monrovian Prince on Twitter. On this episode of the podcast, we have...
Hello, it's Horace_Jeans on Twitter.com. Happy Foxing Day, everyone. It's December 26th.
Hi, hello. It's Dylan. I was on the last podcast, so you already have my Twitter account. You know what's up.
Dylan, I was actually very impressed you actually plugged your Twitter account on the last episode instead of just like angrily being like, "Leave me alone, you cowards."
Yeah. So I feel like I was able to get into the last one. But this one, it's part 2. I feel like if I do it twice, it's
not necessary.
No.
AJ's here as well. They couldn't do a podcast about Pitbull's cover of Africa by Toto without me, so I'm here.
That is our album of the year. Just the
Yeah, sorry to spoil it.
It's the Aquaman soundtrack. Yeah, a last minute decision, but it had to be done.
When like a really great piece of art comes along that you just know right away that it's going to be remembered for a long time, and the Aquaman soundtrack is one of those albums.
We said that Pitchfork were cowards for putting their list out too early because they might miss something, and lo and behold.
And then our final member of the pod that is on this pod is...
Yes, it is me, Josiah, at Joe_Psy_ on Twitter. Phonetic spelling of my name with some underscores in there.
So, it's a good at.
Try to be concise.
But folks, we are finally here now. We have reached the promised land. We are now going to reveal our top 5 albums of 2018. And if you missed the previous podcast, our list is... Hang on a second. I should have actually opened this up before we did the podcast because now I'm going to have to search some Google Docs.
Oh, it's a list, all right.
That was a smooth segue if I've ever heard one.
And hang on a second, folks. I should have been prepared for this, but give me a second to reveal our top 10 so far. Number 10, Sophie, Oil of Every Pearl's On Insides. Number 9, Low, Double Negative. Number 8, Idols, Joy as an Act of Resistance. Number 7, Mitski, Be the Cowboy. And number 6, Casey Musgraves, Golden Hour. And if you want more discussion about those albums, go check out our previous episode.
I would also like to quickly, because I was not able to be on the last episode, I would really just like to say give Casey Musgraves a Grammy, or I will fight every last single member of the recording whatever the name of the Grammy institution is. I'm going to square the fuck up because Golden Hour is one of the best pop albums of the decade.
You're going to fight Pharrell when he goes on and plays Happy again?
Dude, I'm straight up... I'm going to stance the fuck up and square up with Pharrell. It's going down.
Fight CeeLo Green in his full gold suit.
Oh my god.
The gold suit was like a year ago? Like it feels like a lifetime ago.
That was not a year ago. That was at least 2 or 3 years ago.
It was literally something out of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It's ridiculous.
Yes.
Anyways,
hey, top 5 albums of the year. Let's just get right into it, folks. Number 5 on our list, and a very late entry to the list, but a very good entry too. And of course, I am talking about the new Earl Sweatshirt album, Some Rap Songs, which came out at the tail end of November, just barely reaching that sort of mark where people are like, okay, we'll remember if your album comes out on this date. We're the year-end list.
It really, really squeaked it in. If it had come out a week later, it might not have made a lot of people's lists.
But nevertheless, here we are. Earl Sweatshirt, Some Rap Songs, his first album since 2015. And Earl's been sort of MIA for a little bit. He's, we have updates and whatnot. He's done a couple of features here and there, but largely it's been radio silence from him since I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside in 2015, before we get into the album itself, I do want to talk very briefly. I want to sort of transition, do a little do some parallels, a little transition from the last time that we heard Earl on a solo project. Not talking about any of the features, although of course we cannot mention this album without mentioning the Really Doe verse, which is still.
Oh my God! That never has a verse made me like, my hype levels were so high from this album solely off of one like minute long verse on an Alchemist beat, and that was all I needed to sustain hype for a full 2 years. I was just like, yeah, that's good. Just whenever you're ready, I'm ready, because that he raps you a mouse that the falcon picked up. And I don't even know what it means, but it makes my blood boil in the best way. It's incredible.
Yes.
It's art.
But, God. But again, I do want to talk about, but I think like verses are not, I mean, they're canon, but they're like outside the Earl canon a little bit. What I really want to talk about is Solace, which was the 10-minute long song EP that he dropped pretty quickly after I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside on YouTube. And to me, it is up until some rap songs. For me, it was the best thing that Earl had ever done. It was, in my opinion, better than I Don't Like Shit. Because I mean, I'm one of the few people that is like, well, it's fun. I don't mind I Don't Like Shit, but I'm not like the biggest fan of it. I don't mind it, but it's definitely like I know he could do better, and we'll get into the better part as why this album is on this list and why it will probably end up making my top 10 when I kind of redo everything towards the end of the year. But nevertheless, Solace is a really interesting project. For me, it's the first time that Earl, to me, has sounded like a fully realized artist. I think before he was developing his style and still trying to figure things out, and maybe, like I said, the way that he came back. So if you don't know the Earl backstory, which you probably should, basically was an odd future when he was a teenager. His mom sent him to Samoa in 2010, 2011, due to some behavioral issues. He then came back after a 2-year stint there in 2012, and sort of had sort of a weird / rough transition, kind of coming back to the States and having to kind of come back to be like, oh shit, I'm this like super famous rapper now. Like I had basically the group that I was in completely blew up while I was gone, and I'm kind of coming back to with a huge spotlight on me. And Doris, I don't like Doris. I think Doris has some good songs, but overall, it's still very much someone made by someone just hasn't. I know, it's made by someone that still is trying to figure out who they are as an artist.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I really think Some Rap Songs is the best Earl album and is the culmination of like him sort of figuring out exactly like what his sort of style and things. But the thing is that he was so talented, even
and
on
I
Doris,
don't doubt that. No,
that album is good. The collective weight of all those good songs on that album makes Doris like a good album. Like, it has Chum and fucking Sunday and Burgundy and Guild and like all those like dope songs.
I think there's also that. I think Doors is also still an album that I still consider and associate Earl with Odd Future, just because he was still within that.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I mean, there's like 2 or 3 Tower features on there, so I mean,
the thing about the Doris is it really feels like, and I've really been thinking a lot about this sort of whole group, like especially with the passing of like Mac Miller, like kind of that whole moment in like the early 2010s where like a couple of sort of collaborative linkages with like Odd Future and Mac Miller and like all the Brain Feeder people, like there was just that whole kind of bubbling scene. And I think Doris is an album where Earl was still like ingrained in that, and it feels like a part of that whole kind of era of rap music, while these new Earl albums are like, now Earl has sort of gone away and become like his own artist rather than like one dude who's kind of part of this larger scene. And I think it really does feel like in the time it's taken Earl to sort of like hermit up and sort of figure out like himself and his style, I think you can really hear on Some Rap Songs that even though he's still like struggling and he's still going through it, that like you really feel like he's found like a style on this that he's really proud of and that really represents like what he's been getting after. When you listen to like all the kind of stuff that he puts on his radio show and the kind of rap music that he seems to champion, and like the artists that he's collaborating with, like Black Noise and Mike, the rapper from Brooklyn, who put out like 3 or like 5, I don't even know how many good albums. I just recently started getting into Mike, and people are like, yeah, you dropped like 4 albums this year, so I have a lot of that to be getting into. But this whole kind of very jazzy, but like I don't know how to describe.
It's like, I mean, again, he talks about in the Vulture interview that he did this year. A lot of the productions album, it's basically just like he got really obsessed with loops and just sort of locking those loops in, and that's what a lot of production is. A lot of these sort of like 70s soul samples and just locking these loops in to a mesmerizing degree. And I'll try to rush through the rest of this to what I'm trying to lead to. Well, I was trying to lead to earlier. Basically, Doris, like Jackson was saying, still very tied to Odd Future. Still, Earl doesn't really have an individual voice as an artist. He's still trying to figure out his way through basically becoming an overnight sensation. And then I Don't Like Shit on Outside is very much a reaction to sort of that being that overnight sensation and sort of going into this depression. Basically, a lot of that album is sort of him hinting at this sort of depression, but like it's still very tied to the whole Odd Future thing, and still there's a lot of stuff on there on those. There's still a lot of stuff on that album. There's a lot of really good songs, and there's some stuff that's like like. My core thing with some rap songs and why I think it's the best Earl album is that he's finally figured out how to make really great songs and put all those on an album together. Like he's really figured out how to make a great album, as he's been able to make great songs, but he's never been able to put that all together into an album. And I think Solace is the closest he got, mainly because Solace was so short. And that's why some rap songs are so good, is because it's so short, because Earl isn't trying to extend these songs further than they need to. They're about as long as they need to be. You know, he, like I said, with Earl, as once again, that Vulture interview, he very much also got obsessed with sort of brevity and being, you know, like, I don't need to make these long ass songs. Like, I just need to make, you know, again, if I'm done with this song, then that's it. That's all that it needs to be. It just needs to be this long. And Solace was sort of him really doing that, you know, and Solace sounds, I mean, like I said, the progression from Solace to this album is like, it's a very short one because they do sound very similar. It's weird that Solace and I Don't Like Shit were recorded around the same time. I think maybe it was recorded afterwards or before I Don't Like Shit. I don't really remember the timeline. But on Solace, Earl sounds like his own artist. He really sounds like he's fully separated from the Odd Future, and he's really like doing his own thing and just making something really unique. As I mentioned this on Twitter the other day, but Solace to me, and then a song on this album, some rap songs, which we'll get to as we kind of go more into the album. Solace sounds like depression.
Maddie, we're talking like 5 minutes about the EP that came out.
I know, but I really like this EP.
About some
I know, but I really like this EP.
I know, Matty.
I love
it. We got it.
I really feel like Earl is, again, you need to know the context. Earl is someone that I think is very context
Matty,
dependent.
this is the album of the year podcast. We just didn't get to
we'll
do
get
it,
to Solace. Okay, well, I'll tie it back in when we actually talk. Let's get into some rap songs. Some rap songs again. After 3 years, finally came out. It is fucking great. It is the best thing that Earl's dropped.
That's the point we're getting to here, folks. It's a good album.
This is why you shouldn't let me lead. You should have just taken the lead on this one, Jackson, because you knew I was going to do this. I talked about this.
I didn't know you were going to do this, actually, as a matter of fact. Some rap songs. It's Earl's best album. It has some... just the flows are very, like, unorthodox, and I think those 2 singles were really perfect because I think by getting to like spend some time on them and really like let them sit with me, like it made then listening to the album like really, really, really work on its first listen, because they did a great job of sort of setting the expectation of sort of what you're going to get from this project. But like both of those singles are so much better in the context, because this album really like flows like water. Like obviously Earl definitely like is the kind of person who resists the sort of expectations and like doesn't want to be burdened with the kind of expectations that like rap fandom tends to give. Like the fact that like I want to compare this album to Mad Villainy because it reminds me of that Mad Villainy, but I know that's like the cheap comparison, and that Earl like has specifically said like he said like some rap songs challenge try to talk about this album without using the words classic or mad villainy, and it's like he wants the music to just be appreciated as exactly what it is, and that kind of speaks to this sort of blunt face value kind of lyricism also that I think some rap songs has, that kind of like matter of fact way Earl talks about the sort of issues that he's dealing with, and the rapping is just so good on here. Like, oh my god, he's really on one in terms of him. I it's like one of the best albums in recent memory of like really talented rapper like saying, hey, want to see what weird instrumentals I can flow over. It's like, it reminds me of like JPEG Mafia and Atrocity Exhibition and stuff like that, where it's just like so impressive how the pockets he can find on these like disorienting and hypnotic beats.
Yeah. The production is, I think, what I find the most impressive about it, and just how it, like, the way it complements the flows, which are so obtuse, and it makes like each song transition feel so organic, and just the way that it almost like the loops that he finds sort of reminds me of Jay Dilla, not so much in the exact style, but just the way that it's like it feels more organic than just like taking 4 bars from an old soul song and then just cutting and pasting it. It feels like very woozy and psychedelic while also very grounded and real.
Yeah.
So I think on projects, or even like earlier in Earl's career up to this point, it's sort of been, and this I think gets to what Matty was talking about a little bit, it was sort of like he stumbled into being one of the most popular rappers of the world. He's obviously very talented and obviously has an ear and an understanding for what makes the music good. But coming out of Odd Future was this like, hyper flash in the pan kind of collective of all these artists who definitely appealed to a specific group of people, to put that a certain way.
Me,
Matty,
16.
yes, yeah.
Also Matty.
Takes a look at the people who are on the podcast, yeah. And so some rap songs, I think, is Earl's first project that understands like why people come to an Earl Sweatshirt project, and is better for not giving into a lot of those, to say stereotypes, but still being like fun and playful. So Earl's always been very witty and very lyrically minded. And so like the moments where this album is funny are like incredibly funnier than anything else Earl has done. He's very like sarcastic and very witty, like knowing when he's playing offbeat or playing with like some kind of puns. And in songs like On the Way, which is probably like my favorite, where he's just like straight up, just like almost in a Danny Brown kind of way, just like having fun over this kind of ridiculous instrumental that you need to like play back a few times to first understand what's happening instrumentally in that song, and then to kind of appreciate the wordplay, which is why this album is so great at 24 minutes. And I think, the title and the cover work very well with that, like offhanded, impersonal message of it just being like, this is the kind of album that like you're not going to understand in your first listen. It doesn't give you a lot of space to be comfortable or to appreciate it at first glance, and it's something that should grow, all the while being like this very interesting mosaic of the things that make Earl Sweatshirt such a talented artist. And like you just kind of like, I knew from the first listen, I looked at it and I said, like, yeah, damn, like Earl Sweatshirt is still like such a great artist. I don't entirely understand that project, but I know it's good. I understand that it's very good. And the only question is how much more I'm going to appreciate it in the coming listens. And the answer is a lot. This is definitely my favorite straightforward rap album of the year, just for being so like infinitely interesting and respectful of both the listener's perspective and their time.
I also think that, like what you were saying, the sort of enigmatic, sort of loose quality to it works really well with the length, because it's so easily listenable and like the tracks flow together well that 24 minute listen, you bang it out really damn quick, and it's like very satisfying. It's like, damn, wanted to do that again. And that first night it came out, I listened to it in full like 6 times, which I got really like deeper into it on a first listen than I usually do with a project, because of the way it flows and because of the length. And I think that really lends benefit to Earl, people appreciating the sort of subtle complexities, and just they're goddamn ridiculous. I keep thinking about the whole verse on Cold Summers, which is just like a minute and 10 seconds of Earl doing disgusting things in his lyrics.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
I think there's a lot to be said about. I think this is what Matty wanted to chat about. I think to talk about like the content of the last couple songs on the album, but I think the way those last handful of tracks like bleed together so much, and then the album's sort of over, always leaves an impression on me for just like the way every second counts. I think in the stretch from Playing Possum, Peanut, and Riot, in the way that like every single second matters, in as much as they almost all could have been their own song. Like he really understands that finesse of the craft, and like these songs are that fine-tuned where like that much of a change or that much of a difference in some of those songs like might make them fall apart, but that last stretch of the album is immaculate.
Yeah, like the thing is that like I would listen to a version of Riot that's 15 minutes long and it's just that, like a band playing that forever. But there's something about the way that he cuts that little instrumental short in a way that just like it gives it this fleeting emotion where you're just like, that makes you want to listen to the album again. And just like at the very end of it, you just sort of feel like it's reaching this place, and then all of a sudden it just sort of like disappears. And the way that he's able to just craft these songs so precisely down to the last little detail, down to cut this last second or trim it down even more, just making these songs the most like succinct, most potent version of them, and then having them sort of flow together in this style that's like jazzy, but also like I think the thing about the production is that it's simultaneous. It's like it reminds me of lots of other sort of jazzy hip hop, like J Dilla and like Madlib and stuff like that. But there's something like claustrophobic about it, like the way that like the vocals and the samples are mixed. That there's an unease to it that's like it's a little less soulful and a little more kind of like woozy and like nauseous almost. Like it's really has such a specific effect on you, and I think it works really well for the content of the album.
Yeah, there's like a sort of distortion throughout. I don't know if that's the right word, but it just kind of, it has a very almost grimy sound to it. Mm-hmm. There's like a tangible like dirtiness to the album. Both in the production and the flows, I think they I think why the Mad Villainy comparison gets drawn a lot is that these like beats feel inseparable from the verses. You could not like take the stems and put any of these tracks on another beat. Like it just would not work.
That is very true. Yeah, they feel so like specifically crafted as like a whole, not just like, oh, this person sent me this beat and then I rapped on it. Like
I think that feels very impressive in like the 2018 era where like there is a lot of in hip hop just kind of the mass producing of beats and just going for a general vibe instead of searching out and like trying to convey a specific emotion.
Yeah, this album is good as hell, in my opinion.
I want to hop back in.
Go ahead.
We discussed it a little bit, but a lot of this album, it's very much we're seeing Earl in a better place mentally. I mean, the last time we heard him, obviously Solace, like, just what I was trying to say about Solace was that Solace sounds like depression. Like, it just sonically conveys what depression feels like to such an accurate degree that it's just like, I don't know how he did it. And then but on some rap songs, just by the content of the lyrics, and then just by some of the sounds and just the way that Earl sounds, he just sounds better. You know, he sounds much more confident. He sounds, you know, he's in a better place. And there's lyrics obviously about that. I mean, I think I don't know if we mentioned it yet. Veins, which is sort of up until, which was essentially going to be sort of the last like rap song of the album until events happen, which we'll get into. But I mean, like I said, there's just a lot of lines in there where he just seems like he's at peace, you know, like, you know, in Solace, he's like, you know, I ain't been eating, you know, I'm just wasting away. But then here he's like, I've been eating good. You can see it in my tummy. Like, just, he sounds like he's not exactly I mean, he's obviously dealing with mental issues, dealing with depression, but sort of learning to accept that a bit more. And as you know, as someone with depression, you just have to get to that point where you just sort of accept that you have it, and you can only do so much to deal with it. You know, you obviously can go to therapy, you can change your lifestyle a little bit, but you're always going to live with it. And it seems like Earl has been doing things to sort of deal with it in a better place. And then, you know, it's just, and then, yeah, and obviously then, we haven't mentioned it yet, but Playing Possum, which was originally going to be the album's last track, it's sort of intercut samples of Earl's mom and then his dad, where his mom, I think, is giving a speech at her college and, you know, thanking her family, thanking Earl, or Tebe as his real name, and then intercutting that with a poem that his dad read, or that his dad wrote, and then I think performed in 2009, I want to say, and intercutting that, and it was originally going to be a surprise for his parents, like, hey, I put you on my album, like, check this out, and then, and so the album was essentially sort of done and basically on the shelf before his dad died, and it was probably, you know, got sent to the label, was probably getting ready for release, and then his dad died at the beginning of this year and sort of kind of put everything in jeopardy, kind of, and sort of, and if like and Earl, if you obviously know Earl's history, he's had a very, very complicated relationship with his father. His father left him at a very young age, and a lot of the angst of his early music is about the fact that his father left him and sort of having to deal with that, as it's just like, yeah, shit. And then, you know, Playing Possum, which is just this really nice track. It just has this really, you know, great beat, and it's just like really hopeful. And then, you know, just right away, hard cut to Peanut, which is just even on an album filled with like really jarring production, is extremely jarring. It's just, again, however happy, however better Earl sounded earlier on this album, it's just thrown away. It's just like he is in this horrible, horrible place again, dealing with the death of his father. And Peanut, it's probably my favorite song on the album, but it's also probably the most brutal one to listen to, because, like, same with Solace, it sounds like depression. It's not just it isn't just, oh, this person is talking about depression. It sounds like we are in Earl's headspace, and it's not fun. And yeah, and then obviously then the album ends with Riot, which is samples a song that I want to say his uncle did, a jazz song that his uncle did in the 60s, and like sort of trying to get back to a better place and sort of have a happier end to the album. But yeah,
so that whole like last run of the album is incredible, and really like the album sort of starts on this run that has the singles and all these really great rap verses, and it keeps the momentum going, and then it sort of goes into that run at the end there that I like Veins has some of the best raps on, like, just right after that part you were talking about when he says, I've been spending more money than I'm making, stuck in Trump land, watching subtly decayin'. I ain't touch a Zan when it's time to put my burnt body in a case, tell my mama I said thank you. That whole fucking verse is just like, that one and the Cold Summers verse just are unbelievable. Like, the way that there's where he's like able to just sort of like snap with these like crazy, like funny or like really great clever punchlines, but then also like weave those simultaneously into these personal reflections and things. It's just really incredible how seamless it is and how easily it just sort of flows. I also really like the how you want your ribs smoked family line. That makes me laugh. Every single time.
Jackson, I heard you got your sauce at the Enterprise.
That's the one I will probably never get tired of.
It's got, like I said, the singles, Nowhere to Go, which there is a part of me that does kind of wish the album sounded a bit more like Nowhere to Go, where a lot of the album is mainly it's soul samples, but Nowhere to Go just sounds like like I said, it sounds more like JPEG Mafia than anything else, just sort of this like glitchy, distorted production. And it's like, I would like to hear a whole Earl album that sounds like that, but nevertheless, it's still, like I said, I still love this album, and because it, like as Jackson was saying, because it's so short, I just keep running it back, because it's just like, oh, I really enjoyed listening to that, I just want to listen to it again. and it's just nice to like, as someone who's been a long time fan of Earl, it's just finally nice to see, like, holy shit, like, he has an entire project that I can love, and I can be like,
this is all great. Yeah, like, this is.
Because I knew he had this in him. I knew he had this in him for years.
All right, we need to get moving. We got more albums to talk about.
Yes, number 5, Earl Sweatshirt, some rap songs. Number 4, Josiah. What is our number 4 pick for album of the year?
Yes, our number 4 album is "Safe in the Hands of Love" by Yves Tumor. If I pronounce that wrong, feel free to at me on Twitter, fight me in the street, whatever you need to do.
I think it's just Yves Tumor.
I say that.
I wasn't sure if it was like Eve or Eves.
I just say Yves Tumor. That's usually what I go with, but I'm not sure if it's correct.
No,
Yves Tumor.
I've heard Eve is the correct, and whether it's Eve or Eves, I'm not sure, but definitely the like EVE sound.
Mm-hmm. It is an experimental pop album. Released in September. Really?
I would call it a pop album. I would say Yves Tumor, an art pop album. I would say it's a pop album. Like the way that Bjork is a pop album. Like,
it's a pop album,
quote unquote.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's released on Warp and does have
hooks. It's got a couple.
I wasn't really trying to stir anything up, more or less just say that this album is extremely unpredictable and very hard to categorize.
Oh, no, yeah. There's a song on here that will make you spook. Like, this is not the typical vibe of a pop album, but it is very. You can get into it, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's the rollout of this album reminds me a lot of when the Ooze came out last year. Just in that they both came out in the fall, and they're both very sort of experimental and very sometimes more listenable, and they both kind of combine a lot of elements of different genres. Like Safe in the Hands of Love, there's like psychedelic elements here, there's industrial elements. It's just kind of this dark, brooding thing that feels both very of the time and also, I think, sort of timeless. And as we hinted at, there's a run of songs in the middle of this album that is really like the reason this gets the experimental pop label. The run of
all the singles are sort of placed. The way the album is structured is very interesting, where it has this intro track, and then basically it starts out as like a left field electronic album with like some pop vocals in it, and then slowly works its way into being like the experimental electronic version of a pop album with this run of singles of Noid and Lifetime and Licking an Orchid. But then as soon as you start to be like, oh, okay, these are like pop songs, that's when they throw in
Hope and Suffering.
Yeah, Hope and Suffering, which is the one like explicitly like noise track on the album, which basically is there in the track list to be like, hey, if you ever think you know what's happening on this album next, you are incorrect. And then the last part of the album basically transitions into this 3-song suite that ends it, that are all these it's really some of the most interesting fusions of the two, kind of, because like the beginning is just these experimental electronics, and then the middle are these pop songs, but then after Hope and Suffering, like Recognizing the Enemy and Let the Lioness You Flow Through Freely and All the Love We Have Now, those songs are these just completely like trying to put genres on any of this is just like a silly exercise, and I think speaks to the artistic intent of this project about the combination of the fluidity of genre and the intentional rejection of labeling, and the Pitchfork review talked about the idea of labeling and categorizing being a sort of a violent act, and how this music resists categorization by its very nature, and that feels in synchronicity with like the conceptual ideas of like the lyrics as well, like with songs like Recognizing the Enemy, like the refrain of I can't recognize myself, that one of the most unbelievable parts of the album, like those emotions that are in the lyrics are also being mirrored by this completely like super kaleidoscopic vision of pop and experimental music.
I think what the vocals do a lot for me, not even commenting on the lyrics, is how it does one of my favorite things in music, in that it uses the vocals just as another instrument in the whole composition of just the entire sound of the album. And a lot of the time, I really don't even put a whole lot of stock into the lyrics, because I realize that the vocals are conveying an artistic statement that is just kind of beyond its more superficial elements of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think discomfort is the word to best surmise this album, what with the, relevant and sometimes like stinging lyrical content, as well as the just like grossly unsettling album art. And then as well, well, there's a lot going on there. There's certainly
it is easily the best and also worst album art of the year.
I like it. I think it's good.
You could draw a comparison between that album art and the Some Rap Songs album art, where they're both just like blurry figures that look like they're about to attack you.
Yeah,
not maybe less so with
one. Again, one will protect you, the other will.
One will attack you. There it is. Yeah,
that's exactly it.
But yeah, I mean, like the way it jumps between genres and the way it like just completely disregards any categorizations or labels is like a perfect summary of the experience of listening to this album, where you genuinely don't know what's going to come next. And it really is something that is meant to put you in a state of discomfort and unease, which I think is sort of the point of this entire persona and this entire artistic experiment. And so like from that perspective, the album super succeeds in being something that is so singular while being so many things all at once. It's very political. It's very rife with like commentary on gender and sexuality, all the while being music that like you can nod your head to and be like, yo, this shit is good, like this shit bangs. Instrumentally, it's very interesting from like that kind of perspective of just appreciating the electronic music in the craft here. And so the moments with vocals, I think, are like, every time I listen to this album, the vocals are sort of more sparse than I remember them to be, whereas like obviously songs like Honesty and Lifetime are the ones that like stick out as quote unquote like singles, sort of the big ones that I remember. But a lot of the experience of listening to this album is long sections of just electronic loops or just kind of drone sections, really interesting bits of noise here and there as well. But the entire experience is something that like leaves the same impression. And it's one that I think, as we mentioned before, is very spooky and very gross. But again, that's the point. So it's just a tremendous achievement. Definitely, it's in my top 5 personally, for sure. And like the first time I heard it, it sort of came out of nowhere and sort of blew me away. And I think that was a lot of people's response to it. It's worth mentioning, maybe since this is what we do on the podcast, that it is like the highest score Pitchfork gave out this year. And I do think that write-up was like extremely well done, in the fact of just like, I think it came out a day or two after the album itself came out, and I read, like, I had formed my opinion on the album being that I liked it very much, and I read through that review and I was just like, oh yes, like this is a tremendous achievement. And like, so I would point people towards that Pitchfork review to just like, if you bounce off this album and like don't understand what people like about it so much, I think the Pitchfork review does a really good job of contextualizing the artist's career up to this point, and then like why this album is so impressive and so important.
Agreed, yeah.
I think Okay, I think what's so impressive about the mashing of genres and the fact that both ends of the album do feel so kind of murky and weird is that it still feels like a very coherent project, and probably his most coherent project yet. It's just like, I remember someone saying around the time of its release that if you like tried to draw this album out visually, it would be like a mountain with the middle being like the most pop accessible. And that would be true, except like after a Lifetime, you like Hope and Suffering just kind of like throws you off a cliff figuratively, but then it kind of like works its way back up into like a mixture, and then Let the Lioness.
And then they throw you off the cliff again, and then you get thrown off the cliff again.
Let the Lioness is like this driving, like very like almost feels like a loud like pavement song, but more psychedelic and just like very violent, and I love it.
And then that sample at the end, God, like,
yeah,
that Be Your Angel Fire. It's just like the first time I heard that, I'm like, what is going on? And then of course the album just ends, and you're like, what? Like I need to hear more of that sample.
Let the Lioness and You Flow Freely is like one of the best album closers of the year by far. That I was gonna say, just I want to give a huge shout out to the drums on this album, because they just didn't have to go as hard as they did, but they did. Like Lifetime is notable for that insanely good drum loop that makes up the backbone of the song, but also like the drums that come in toward the end of Recognizing the Enemy, when that song finally builds to the climax, the drums that just bash your head in all through Let the Lioness and You Flow Freely, the kind of weird like subterranean like beats on Honesty, and then the beat toward the end of Economy of Freedom, where that song kind of like lurches into place. Like there's some really damn good drums in here that like give the album so much like forward momentum through the experimentation of it, that just is like, I don't know what's going on right now, but I feel it in my chest because of these incredible like pounding drums.
Yeah, on like my first listen of the album, as soon as I heard Honesty, I think I knew I loved it. Just the way that like the way it starts, where it sounds almost as if like the drum track is being held underwater, or just like it has this very murky feeling, and then just kind of surfaces.
The Pitchfork review described it as like a Boys to Men track submerged under like an icy lake.
Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about very brief with this album is that, again, mentioning Pitchfork again, they talked about this in a review that I hated this year, and if you know me, you know that's the Dean Blunt review that they did this year for Soul on Fire. And I hate this review because I think it just misunderstood the point.
We should note that did make their like best experimental albums list, and still that review did not read like it.
No, exactly. I don't. Anyways, the first thing they talk about in that review is the unified theory of pop, which is, and I quote, a synthesis of styles that's able to appeal to hip hop heads and indie rock fans alike, while scoring Hollywood scenes and rendering cutting edge club hits. Kanye may have gotten the closest, but you can hear the same quest through the likes of Dev Hynes, King Krul, and Michael Levy, and their way through omnivorous musical interests converge. And I think Yves Tumor could be added to those artists of someone who is really in that unified theory of pop, because for one, obviously all the genre play that he does in this album, where basically every track does not sound like the one that came before. It sort of is playing with all these different genres at once in a really interesting and unique way, while still making a very cohesive album, because like Yves Tumor, or Sean Bowie, which is apparently his real name, it may be fake, who fucking knows with him. Like, as we mentioned, they are a cryptid.
The article about the Pitchfork profile on Yves Tumor has a line in there about their name may or may not be Sean Bowie. It's one of those. It's one of those sorts of things.
And then also another wild thing about this album is that like Sean Bowie, Yves Tumor, he's from like Kentucky or something like that. Like
that is, I did not know that.
He's from like
Tennessee.
Tennessee, thank you. Which is still like wild to me. Like, how do you go from like? It's like the internet is a lovely thing.
It's a beautiful thing.
I would honestly say that like I feel like I can kind of hear that in his music. Like you can feel that he has witnessed like conservative culture in America firsthand.
Yeah. I wanted to mention that I think there are a lot of moments on this that remind me of like something Blood Orange would do, and I think it's definitely attributed to like the similarities in the vocal presentation, but just in that way as well, of just being like, oh, I understand like this whole, I've seen all of these, you know, various injustices and etc., and like I'm going to present them here very plainly, and just like this is the way shit is, and especially in 2018 when everyone is aware of the way shit is, for an album to just be like, yo, this is the way shit is. In some ways, this album definitely feels like the best snapshot of 2018, at least when it came out, 3 months ago, which felt like a fucking eons ago, but that's where we are.
Speaking of musical similarities between Yves Tumor and Blood Orange, that Smoke remix that they dropped with Ian Isaiah and Blood Orange and Yves Tumor on it is so good. I'm going to play that song a lot next summer, I will tell you that.
I want to say, I guess we probably should get to the next album soon, but one more thing we should get soon. One more thing. I know I already had my one Dean Blunt mention of the podcast, but I do want to mention again because this one is actually not unfounded because like one of Yves Tumor's biggest influences is Hype Williams, which was the group that Dean Blunt was in back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and their brand of sort of like experimental electronic music that just like that was like lo-fi for like lo-fi. Like that shit sounds bad. Like it sounds terrible, but there's still like those nuggets in there where it's like there are good songs in here. I feel like this album is sort of the closest. It feels like a way the evolution of black metal in 2014, where sort of playing with all these genres, but where I still love black metal. I think it's a great album. It definitely is a little hurt by Dean Blunt, as I think Dean Blunt is great, but it's amateurish, you know, and that's the appeal of it for me. But I feel like this album is sort of giving that album, black metal, but just giving it a production budget and someone who has got a far wider scope, you know. I mean, this is very clearly, and then the way that I got interested in Yves Tumor back in 2016 with Serpent Music was like, hey, I know you like Dean Blunt, I know you'll like this. And I feel like this album is definitely an evolution of that album, Serpent Music, where it's sort of, I mean, there's songs in your opposite, you know, your Lifetime and your Noid that are playing to a bit more of to a not necessarily mainstream audience, but definitely like this album, like he knew, like, hey, like I know that there's gonna be, I'm gonna have more ears and eyes on me than usual with this album, but also not backing down from what his original style was. It's sort of taking these sort of two things and making a really unique statement. Like, God, I really love this album. It's hard. It's an album that is very hard for me to put into words, like why I like it, because again, it's an unpredictable listen, because even having listened to it a bunch of times, I still like am not really sure, like, oh wait, like what track comes after this one? And then you hear like the harsh noise and you go, oh, it's that one. Okay, gotcha. But yeah, I fucking love this album, and I'm very happy to have it at number 4, as I think it might, if I redid my top 10, this would probably be a top 5 release for me in 2018. So yeah. Are we all ready to move on to number 3 on the list?
I think so, yeah.
Let's get to number 3. Number 3 on the list, Haley Hendrix, I Need to Start a Garden, which is my personal album of the year, and an album that I really love. And I have to mention this right off the bat, because Dylan will get mad at me. Dylan was the person that they put me on this album.
Yep.
Dylan was the one who came in the podcast chat, was like, hey y'all, check out this album. It's really fucking good.
Look, I don't ask for much. All I want is the acknowledgement that every single person that in indie Twitter, on Indieheads, on the podcast, whoever listened to Haley Hendrix, it was me, baby. It was all me.
I don't ask for much, but what I do ask for is a prompt and accurate airing of receipts.
Mama Bird Recording Company, send me your checks, bitch.
But nevertheless, Haley, this is like I said, it's my album of the year. And I feel weird about putting my album of the year, as it's very similar to my album of the year last year, Lamelda Thanks, which, by the way, Lamelda Thanks in stores now, double whammy. But nevertheless, this album, it's similar in a lot of ways and also very different. For one, where the Lamelda album was very much more, it was more folk. I mean, both these albums are very much folk rock albums, but the influences and the way they sound.
Haley leans more on the side of being toward like the singer-songwriter genre than she does being in the folk rock. And one of the, I mean, we'll get fully into it, but the thing that I sort of identified as being one of the strongest strengths of this album is that it manages to perfectly balance the line between the kind of single person and their guitar singer-songwriter, like I'm plucking and telling you a story style, but it knows exactly when to bring in more instrumentation, and it does so in such subtle and gentle and creative ways where it never really feels like it. There's a couple of moments where it works into more like kind of folk rocky instrumentation, but most of the time it just like knows where to add like a little horn here on the bug collector, or a little string there, or a little extra flourishes, while still maintaining it. Really, the focus is really always on Haley and her guitar playing and her vocals and lyrics. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why this album works, and it also works well because Haley Hendrix, she's good, folks. she's good.
She's fucking good. And also another thing with this album, it's a lot more esoteric than Thanks, and I think
for sure,
which makes the repeated listens to this album like you're rewarded with each listen to this album, because there's more you understand and there's more that you get at with this album, as it's like it's a very deeply personal album, but you have to kind of dig in there and kind of figure out why it's like that. But you already hear it in the vocals, as Haley is a tremendous singer. Like, she's really fucking good at singing and really good at conveying emotion, where if you don't really understand what she's saying, you can kind of the way that she builds her songs and the way that she sings them, you can kind of feel what she's feeling. I think, like, for one, The Bug Collector, there's this sense of dread that is going on throughout the track, but the most of the album, most of the track is just like about these bugs that she finds and sort of getting really paranoid about them and sort of treating them as deeper beasts than they actually are. You know, it's the song essentially is sort of about basically I think, like, her partner sort of going through having, like, these demons, and sort of the bugs kind of representing the demons to him, and not like hell demons, like personal demons, but it could be both. Who knows with this album, honestly. But I think The Bug Collector is really where the album caught my attention. I think No Face is a great intro, by the way, like, really nice and short, and it's just Haley and her guitar. And by the way, God, the guitar work in this album, it's so beautiful.
It is immaculate. It gets the Cause Head seal of approval. That's some good guitars playing right there, folks.
I wouldn't call it like a folk album explicitly, but it is certainly an ally of folk music, which rocks to me. From an instrumental perspective, the guitar work on this is very, very interesting.
And she's not afraid to let it rip too. I mean, like, Worth It has some fucking
absolutely.
Worth It has some of the best song progression that I have heard out of any song all year.
Yeah,
I mean, the way that it's. No, go ahead.
Moments where it goes off in air quotes are definitely, like, among the most memorable of the album, just because it is, like, such a pleasurable listen. And then when it builds, as Dylan's mentioning, like, those builds always end up in something that is super satisfying and super compelling.
That is something that I think it has in common with Thanks, is that sort of ability to have that great songwriting throughout that also then builds up into these sort of really, really well executed emotional payoffs that just add so much to sort of your, like, memory of the album and the experience.
Yeah, and vocally, like, she reminds me of a sort of, like, Angel Olsen acolyte, but her personal, like, story and sort of rise to fame is super interesting. I believe she, like, won the NPR Tiny Desk, like, contest in 2016 or something like that. So
I don't think she won, but she was, like, a runner-up, and she was like one of the ones that got, like, a lot of buzz from the Tiny Desk concert.
Had, like, a super popular like, viral video, essentially, and so to, like, come off of that and make this kind of project that is very, like, personal and subdued, and definitely feels like a more kind of, like, intimate singer-songwriter debut that would be on, like, a larger sort of major label. Like, not to say there's a cloth to be cut from for those kinds of records, but, like, we know the kind of records
they have this sort of base appeal where there are the people that like these kind of guitar and songwriting driven singer-songwriter albums, and they want those two elements, and there can just be sort of there are a dime a dozen of singer-songwriters who just do that, who is just like I like, and all of them are talented songwriters, but like we're talking about here is that Haley manages to the instrumentation is so precise and well crafted and really, really, really well done that
it really channels.
There's
really a channel of intimacy in the instrumentation as well that I don't think a whole lot of other singer-songwriters and a lot of contemporaries are really able to bring either. I mean, I think if you gave this, if you gave, like, the same songwriting and lyrics to, you know, say maybe a Julian Baker, or give them to an Angel Olsen or something like that. Yeah. I don't think it's going to have that deeply personal, intimate touch to it, and I think that's where Haley really excels for me and is able to stand out from a lot of her other folksy singer-songwriter artists.
Contemporaries,
in her contemporaries, is that she's able to bring such a brevity to her structure and create this atmosphere that's really warm and welcoming and inviting, but also isn't afraid to let itself at times be insecure or be intimidated or intimate or what have you.
I think that's like, I think it's a real like impressive thing that this album does, because like Matty was saying, it's very esoteric, and usually in order for songwriters to pull off this sort of kind of intimacy where it's like really quiet and you're really listening, the way that they tend to do that is sort of like, oh, I'm going to reveal personal details. Like, I mean, the Cause school of, I'm going to tell you this really heart-wrenching story of a thing that happened to me, and you're going to listen and try to connect with the emotions. And it's like Haley manages to, with her voice and the instrumentation, create that sense of intimacy before you've necessarily figured out what she's getting at, and get you to pay attention even though you're still kind of mulling over. Like, there's a lot of abstract metaphor. Like, basically, I mean, the I Need to Start a Garden title is fitting. Like, basically every track on this album has at least one nature-related metaphor of some kind. And I think she's a really talented writer. Like, some of the ways that these song meetings are sort of esoteric, but like you said, like deeply, deeply personal and intimate, and the way that she's talking about very personal stuff, but managing to do it in a way that is simultaneously conveying those emotions, but also conveying them in more complex and nuanced ways.
Yeah, so the title of the album, I think, comes from the lyric on Shalala, which like is definitely sequenced super well on the album, being like that explosive, like I think has the best explosive cathartic moment on the album, and so being like the penultimate song definitely does that. But that's really where it hits, and where like it's most obvious that her talent as a songwriter is like very natural and comes across very like informally on this album, but is definitely always like upfront, because I think everything about this album works super well together, both like the playing and the songwriting, her voice and the lyrics. Like, there really isn't anything that could be changed or like pointed out as a flaw of this album. It's just a hyper pleasurable listen, in my opinion. I'm definitely excited to see what we get next from her. I definitely think she can explode to that level of like Phoebe Bridgers, Lucy Dacus, Julian Baker type popularity. Yeah. I think like she fits very well in that troupe, while still preserving, of course, her own like very important and critical identity.
I will officially announce that this is the Jackson Sip of the Tea album of the year. Like, I've had so many cups of tea listening to this album, much in the spirit of Julie Byrne from last year. Shout out to green tea and also honey. It is good company to keep. Yes, exactly. It's like this album is so like sad and personal, but it's just it this kind of music has this warm comfort to it, and it's just like, here, come listen to me tell a story over this here guitar. That is just, it's something that only this kind of music is really able to capture, but she does it in such a unique way that only really I think she could pull off.
Just checking in to say, if you haven't already figured it out, I slept on this album heavy.
I got into it in the last like 4 or 5 weeks. I mean, yeah, like most of the year.
So this album was a kind of a constant presence. I think it dropped pretty early for me. Dropped pretty early. And then for me, while I was just talking about the album, I was thinking like why it ended up like sort of not making my list. And I think like it's just really good at what it does. I think what it does is great, and I already know I love what it does. So it wasn't like sort of surprising or revelatory to me. And when it came time for end of year stuff, this album just sort of felt like something kind of like friendly that had always been there for me, that I knew, and I didn't even kind of recognize it as an album that had come out in 2018. I was just like, yeah, I know that album's great. Like, I genuinely just sort of forgot that it was a product of this year. And maybe like on reflection, it probably should have been on my list, but maybe I just love it even more and it doesn't belong on a list because it's too good and too pure. That's my being a shithead who forgot about this album.
Sure.
That's my excuse for not including Camp Cope's album.
Okay. Yeah, like shouts the fuck out to the Camp Cope album too. I know it didn't make our top 10, but shouts the fuck out to that album specifically.
I want to mention another thing with this album. I mean, we were talking about, like I said, there's a lot of stuff with this album. It's sad, it's depressing, but it's also just like really touching and funny at times. I mean, Untitled God Song it's just like kind of a fun song. It's obviously like it's just talking about it's like sort of, you know, it doesn't feel like it's sort of esoteric still. It's like she's talking about someone that's very important in her life, but still it's just sort of a fun endeavor where it's like, you know, Shift A, Right B, Nintendo 63 on her video, baby. Like, what is she going on about? And it's just this really lovely song that's still, you know, like, yeah, I don't know. And also, similar to some rap songs, it's brevity. Like, this album is only, like, less than a half an hour long. I think it's, like, 28 minutes, maybe a little over 30. And it's just one, like I said, the reason I fell in love with this album over the summer, because I had the CD, and I just kept playing it in my car, because it was just so short. It was just like, oh, I'm just going to, you know, just play it back and back, because if it's on my commute, you know, and just fun with all these songs.
Here's the thing. Albums should be 30 minutes. And movies should be 90 minutes. And this is my campaign for my presidential campaign. This is my platform. These are my politics. Join me if you feel similarly.
Like I said, wait till we get Vice President Travis. Wait till we get Vice President Travis Scott as the two beats.
Movies should be 90 minutes unless they are burning by Lee Chang Dong, and then they should be 2.5 hours long, or however the hell they want to be.
What were you gonna say, Dill?
I was just going to say, I think albums should be 19 minutes long with 6 tracks. And really, that's how we get albums of the year, folks.
Guys, you're all wrong. They should be 10 tracks long, 40 minutes. This was clearly established years ago. You are all fools.
Jesus.
I think really we all agree that... I think we all agree that universally the best album is the 16-track, 2-hour, and 9-minute double album, popularized by Common as Light and Love, our Red Valleys of Blood.
Guys,
I think we're ready to move on to our
okay. Yeah,
our
we
number
need
two.
to move on. I wish I could talk about this album a bit more, but it's all, like I said, it's esoteric. It's hard to talk about. Just fucking listen to it. It's lovely and beautiful. And Haley Hendricks. Also, if you have not seen her live, if you get the chance to see her live, go see her live. She's lovely live. Again, the songs sound great, and also she has to change the tuning in her guitar every single time she does a song, because all the tunings are completely different for every single song. Like, it's fucking wild. It's wild. But nevertheless, our number 2 pick for album of the year, and this is this top 2. I will say this top two could have gone either way. We actually, our number 2, if we are talking on a technical level in terms of points, this would be our number 1, but we sort of we pulled a psychopomp like we did in 2016, where it's just sort of like it didn't get the points, but it's just one of.
Every year, we just need to remind you that there are no rules.
There are no,
and we are autocratic dictators of indie music.
Yes, exactly. But our number 2 album of the year, Jackson. What is it? You go on ahead.
It is You Won't Get What You Want by Daughters, which is an album that I have talked about on this podcast before. I just wrote about exactly too many words on the Indieheads subreddit over on their Album of the Year series. You can check out my Twitter if you want to go see that. I've got it up there. It's also on Reddit, Indieheads, you know the deal. But yeah, this album is it's incredible. I wasn't even this wasn't even my radar in terms of like I didn't listen to like post-hardcore like this before this music. Not even like I didn't know this band, but like this I don't get me wrong, I like loud rock and roll music with guitars. Big fan. Have been for a minute now, but like stuff that really, really ratchets up there to like the levels of like metalcore and like mathcore stuff, and like really that kind of post-hardcore music was never really my area of expertise, and so I didn't expect this to be one of my 2 favorite albums of the year. But then like The World happened, and then I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I get this now. This makes I look outside and then I listen to this and I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. This adds up. Wow, what a harrowing experience listening to this album is. This album, I describe it in a number of ways in the album, but I've just one of my favorites is that it's kind of like a burning car that's like hurtling down like a hill with no brakes, and it's also falling apart at the seams, but it manages to stay sort of in one piece because it's just hurtling forward so quickly. This album like feels like the way that the uneven time signatures and the mashing beats and the like truly cacophonous walls of guitar noise fuckery that they're up to on this album, like it's true. It's so, even for people that are experienced in metalcore and post-hardcore, like this album takes it up to a level of disorientation and abrasiveness that is really wild to see. And they combine that with, I think while this album, I have put another album on this list because this album is not one that I listen to all of the time. If you listen to this album all the times, you'll have brain problems and you'll feel terrible, and I don't recommend it. But like this album, in terms of a piece of art, like I think this is really one of the greatest like achievements of this year. What it says about like being alive in the 2010s, what it says about the burdens of maintaining the self in a world that is increasingly cruel and within systems that are inherently oppressive to the human spirit. It's really a fascinating, like, lyrical document, which is insane. And the thing that this album does well is that it manages to convey those, like, really heady, like, usually with post-hardcore albums like this that have, like, really deeply felt lyrics, usually don't really pick up on the lyrics at first because you're kind of busy with the whole incredibly loud rock music thing, and it's hard to sort of fully grasp some of the, like with bands like Death Heaven, like it takes a while before you figure out what they're actually saying in the songs. And really, even when you do, you're sort of just like, you know what the lyrics are and you hear it and you've understood that those things are saying those things. But like with the kind of shouty spoken word delivery that Alexis Marshall does on this album, that has, and Josiah's friend actually pointed this out to me when we were talking about the album a couple months ago, there's like no effects on any of the vocals anywhere on this album. Like every vocal is just dry and uncut, and it has this really terrifying effect, like the sort of matter-of-fact quality, the way the vocals are processed, and the way that they sort of cut through even over the walls of cacophonous noise. I could go on for this album for long. Someone else take the baton. Go.
Yeah, going off of what you said about the vocals not having any effects on them, I feel like that adds another layer onto them, where it's so... I mean, the vocals delivery and the lyrics are already incredibly demanding of your attention, but just having them be this very plain, very dryly produced, dryly given, just adds another level of detail to it that makes it feel as if, you're actually losing your mind on this record.
Yeah. Oh, like that's one of the things I say in my review is that, like, the performance by him is so incredibly compelling, and the way that it builds on the meaning of the lyrics themselves. It's like you get completely lost in the performance the way you do an acting performance, where you forget that you're watching someone be the front man of a band, and you feel like you're listening to someone like lose their mind in like a true sense, and the power of that when you combine it with the noise rock insanity that's going on here. Like the Flammable Man, the midsection of the Flammable Man where it goes into the noise breakdown, it's so loud that like it took me 5 listens to realize there are gunshots being sampled, just like gunshots just in the mix randomly. It's truly like pure musical chaos, but it manages to work in this way because it has these mathcore grooves that are like lurching and hypnotic and just like pound your brain into submission. Like, no, actually you do enjoy this. And I'm like, fair enough, I guess you're the boss here.
Yeah, so I mean, you will probably be able to tell if this is an album for you upon hearing that like there's an extended section of the album where a man just yells, "Don't tell me how to to do my job at you angrily over and over and over again.
Which is a song about music critics, by the way.
Which was a great little piece of trivia here. I mean, like, this album is so angry and abrasive, and very interesting in just the way that all of it is such a clusterfuck and so cacophonous, but is still just like so fun to entertaining. I'm gonna put it out there that this is the gym album of the year for sure, because listening to the thing just gets me like pumped up and wants to beat the shit out of literally everyone around me. Also a great like subway, public transportation kind of album. One to listen in public where you're just like walking angrily.
I can't relate. I when I put this album on, I can't look at other people in the eyes.
Well, that's the thing.
It makes me feel upset.
That's why it's the perfect subway album. It's like such a dehumanizing experience where it's just like,
really
is shit. Everyone is shit. I'm just so mad all the time. But
that makes perfect sense.
Yes.
If you start screaming the lyrics of this album on a subway, I'm pretty sure that's ending up on Twitter.
Yeah, look,
so.
not that I haven't, but anyway, the album like rips. It's the definition of something that rips, owns, whips ass, and makes a great first impression just because it continually tops itself in terms of how ridiculously aggressive and macho it can be while still being like super interesting from a musical perspective, because like Jackson mentioned, the guitar work is super interesting. There are some really complicated layers of sound effects going on, all the while it still just has this very, very like post metalcore sound to it that's like it toes the line of being like almost explicitly a metal album very carefully, because the instrumentation is just like disgustingly filthy and the guitar work is just like dark and brooding. But everything about this album is just so compelling, and I absolutely love listening to it because it knows when to sort of take a break and give you something like Satan and the Weight, which has this really, really great drawn out intro that just is like, the lyrical matter is disgusting to listen to. You're just doing the kind of like big Quint stank face the entire time you're listening to it, just going like, this is filthy. How did they get away with making this kind of music where they're talking about someone whose face looked like they were drinking concrete through a straw? This is like, how
lyric is so good.
And record it and put it on an album that someone.
That song is also interesting as a single, because it's like by far the slowest song that they've done. That's one of the interesting things that they work in this album, is that like their first couple albums are like these 12 minute, like 20 minute, 18 minute, like just grindcore your face to death from start to finish albums. And the way that they're able to work in slower tempos and like moments of melody and like beauty into the chaos of this album are really some of the moments that like take this from being like, oh, this is just like one of the coolest experiences of the year, like, wow, this is really something like special. Like when you get to the ambient section, and I mean, we can have a whole like 10-minute conversation about Guest House, which is one of the best songs of the decade and is just like towering in every sense. But like when you get to that ambient like horns and strings at the end of Guest House, like the effect of having your brain adjust to the abrasiveness of their music for 40 goddamn minutes, and then to be given what you want, finally to be given like melody and beauty. It has such a like an emotional whiplash effect that is so unique, and like really like I talk about it all in my review, but like this album affects me physically in the way that like very little art does. Like rarely does listening to music like change my body temperature like this does. And that's really a testament. Pumping. Yeah, it is a testament to how great this album is. And how many times you've heard it. Like it's not gonna not freak you out, because there's no way to ever really like become desensitized to it.
Yeah. I think you, Jackson, kind of perfectly primed me for listening to this album when we hung out like a few months ago. And then the only reason it hasn't really made my top 10 is like really because of the way it physically affects me, and just that like it's hard to pinpoint like the kind of mood I need to be in to listen to this album, because
there are days when I think I want to listen to this album and I put it on and I go, nope, can't handle that right now.
It's just kind of
hard. Nope.
It is like throwing a grenade into your own emotions and just like seeing what happens.
Oh my god, having to write like 3,000 words about this and be listening to it for like a lot of that was an experience I don't recommend, I'll be honest. Like really wallowing in that album intellectually for a couple of days can really do a number on you.
You could probably relate to when I can't remember what the context of it was, but when in the Slack chat or whatever for Pitchfork, they were like, there's a single from this album where a man is screaming, "Don't tell me how to do my job," and Ian Cohen was like, "I probably have to review that."
Exactly. That's learning that the gimme gimmes. It adds so much to that song also, because the lyric, like, they got a name for people like you, but I forgot to write it down, is really funny. Like, given the whole context of things. But I think also one of the things that's interesting, like when AJ was talking about it, like upping the macho ante, it really does do that, but like in a similar way to Idols, like the macho-ness of it is not really, it's very, besides the Reason They Hate Me, which is the song that has the "Don't Tell Me How to Do My Job" lyric, and it's like the most explicitly kind of pop, I guess you would call it. Like it's the most catchy song they've ever done. But outside of that song, like most of the anger here is either existential toward the world or like inward self-destruction. Like so much of this album is not even like the world is shit or like I'm being oppressed by outside forces, but it's just like living in this world I can barely keep myself. Like songs like Long Road No Turns, like everybody climbs real high and falls far, little is all it takes. And then like lyrics like the ones on Flammable Man where it's like, I don't live near the ocean anymore for fear that the tide will turn, and all that stuff. And like, is something burning here? Is it me? Like the way that like they turn the macho intensity up to these unbelievable in volumes, but then use that energy to sort of tear himself apart until eventually on Guest House he gives up and just sort of the album like just sort of loses steam like a dying animal that's just like running out of strength left to keep going forward. It's just harrowing. And I haven't even talked about Ocean Song. I can't even get into all the things. Ocean Song is just upsetting. It's just deeply upsetting, and like would be my like short story of the year if it was a piece of literature. It's so incredibly written and genius and terrifying.
A riff on that song is comparable to a riff on a song on the next album we're going to talk about, as far as just being one of the filthiest riffs of 2018.
Oh yeah, these two top albums are some beefy gym albums and some beefy riff albums.
We're bringing them rock and roll guitars to this year-end list.
If
the rockiest guitarist.
If you thought we weren't going to respect rock and roll music and guitars in this podcast, you don't know what podcast you're listening to,
You've
buddy.
been sorely mistaken.
Not having the Indieheads podcast top 10 almost exactly mirror yours. Like, can't relate. 3 years running. Let's fucking go.
Oh, yeah. this year especially, my own personal list and the Indieheads collective taste did the Dragon Ball Z Fusion Dance. And, like, if you haven't noticed, 4 of my top 5 albums on my own list, which is coming out soon, I promise. I'm almost done. But 4 of my top 5 albums are in our top 5, and 3 of them are in the exact spots that I put them. So the brand, it's strong. Rock and roll music with guitars, they're good. This Daughters album is incredible. I recommend that you go read my piece on it because it's more coherent than the rambling here. But yeah, I love this album a lot.
Noise rock, baby. It makes me want to smash my head through a wall, and boy howdy. That's all I got.
In the good way, in the very good way.
In the best way possible.
I also briefly want to give a shout out to City Song, which is like a genius intro to this album, and the way that this album decides to like slow build and then just it goes through like this sonic wormhole where it's like, oh buddy, you're in for it now, and then it just starts whamming you with just not even like rock, just like noise, abrasion, hits and hits of guitar and drum that don't even resemble music, and it's just like, welcome, you're here, and when you're here, you're family, like they say at Olive Garden.
Basically,
committing violence.
Basically, in summation, you were born a schmuck and you'll die a schmuck. Welcome to hell, idiot.
Yes, in the ever living words of Gil Faizon, or George St. Geegland, I mean, excuse me. I'm so sorry, Mr. Geegland.
All right, I think that's as good a time as any to transition to our number one.
Our number one.
Should we do a brief recap real quick?
Let's do that. Yeah,
brief recap. Number 10, Sophie, Oil of Every Pearl's Uninsides. Number 9. I gotta open the doc again. Number 9, Low, Double Negative. Number 8, Idols, Joy as an Act of Resistance. Number 7, Mitski, Be the Cowboy. Number 6, Casey Musgraves, Golden Hour. Number 5, Earl Sweatshirt, Some Rap Songs. Number 4, Yves Tumor, Safe in the Hands of Love. Number 3, Haley Hendrix, I Need to Start a Garden. Number 2, Daughters, You Won't Get What You Want. And number 1, Andrew Jackson Moser. What is our number 1 album of 2018?
Yeah, it's the Aquaman soundtrack featuring recording artist Pitbull. No, of course it has to be Near My God by Foxing. Not only the best rock and roll album of the year, but in my humble opinion, it's by far the best album of 2018. I think a tremendous soaring achievement in many, many ways. Touches on these genres of emo, of indie rock, of indie pop a little bit, and also represents a very breakthrough moment for the band themselves, who have been sort of a staple of this, we'll call it like B-tier emo folk, sort of this new wave of the third wave emo revival, where it's very popular on college campuses, very popular with people who wear flannel, very popular with people who have facial hair. Sort of were siphoned off to a clique or a group being seen as one of a capital T, those bands with a capital B as well. Like they had their lane that they very clearly could have stayed in and ridden out with moderate success, but on Near My God, as the album's content speaks to, they strove forward with a fiery ambition that could not be quenched by any number of adversaries that are mentioned and detailed on the album, and gave way to this tremendous album that I think speaks as a monument to confidence in the face of adversity and just like powering through when things seem hopeless and weak, and when there are lots of things that stand against you, just rising up with the most raucous guitars and bagpipe sections and trumpets and ambient interludes that you can imagine, and saying, nay, I shall prevail and I shall push forward and I shall rock and I shall rip, and my guitars will be loud and they will be strong and they will be real and they will be my friends.
This is the album that the 1975 album was told not to worry about. And the thing that's such a shame is that this album didn't get any of the shine that album did, because like you said, it is one of those bands that is those bands, and when things get lumped in with the sort of emo crew, they're sort of perceived as albums that are passionately loved by, like Ian Cohen was talking about this, like the albums that are labeled as being for diehards, even though they clearly have ambitions of being like even though they seem actively aware of the fact that they're not going to be the biggest rock band in the world due to that kind of being a fruitless endeavor. It's like, we're going to even if we're never going to play the arena that these songs are written for, we're going to write them for this venue that we're playing tonight for 500 people, because like this is what we believe we can do as a band, and we think that we can make an album that is special and is important. And so often trying to make something important is fundamentally uncool. It's fundamentally not cool to try to insert yourself into critical praise or like the status of importance by force or whatever. But this album doesn't do that. It just really speaks to like what this band has been capable of this whole time, and them sort of achieving it to the best of their abilities with the help of the god Chris Walla, who came in and helped them take it to the next level. And boy, this album shreds. It's so good.
You guys, I don't know who it is in the video. You know the video, the producer, he's like in the studio and he's like going back and forth, like playing stuff on the keyboard and then like
Oh, are you talking about the video of Kanye where he's in the suit and the sunglasses and he runs over and that is I mean, there is the video of Kanye in the suit and sunglasses in the studio where he's playing the keys and then he's doing the silly walk over to the other keys and he's doing that is Kanye.
I maybe think of different, but like basically that's Chris Waller to this album of like, hey, let me show y'all. I'm
gonna run over here, do this real quick. I'm gonna run over here, add some bagpipes over there. I'm gonna run over like this album. Like the thing that comes across on first listen is that sort of every song has these different like bells and whistles on it. Like they each sort of take a particular sort of style of rock music, whether that be sort of alternative, emo. There's a song on here that sounds like a Radiohead "Hail to the Thief" song. There's all sorts of different like angles on their general style of rock music on each song. Each song also will have like multiple production details, like the little synthesizer on Trapped in Dillard's, or the bagpipes or the strings on different songs, or there will be dramatic transitions, or there will be a 5-minute long like ambient section at the end of a song, like on Five Cups, and like each song like has all these things packed into it in a way that at first can feel like, oh, they overdid it or it's Maximus, but that's just kind of, I think, our inclination right now, maybe like critically, because I think the more that I sat with it, I'm like, wait, no, all of these bells and whistles each add something to each song. Like they're not just there to be like, oh, look, we threw a bagpipe on this bad boy. They each really do feel like they serve the songs and they serve the songwriting first and foremost. None of
the individual songs are like the that song. So something like Game Shark isn't like the hardcore song or the fast song. It's just like another song in the sequence of this record, which is super important because it is cohesive, I think, as you're getting at here. Like, and what I sort of introed it with, like the theme of the album, the concept of the album, and then the actual content of the music, like, are hand in hand of just that ambition and that like cheesy but well realized like desire to strive to actually sound better, to make the most important album of the year, like to make something that would be, if we could get close to a definitive album of the year, like this album wants to be that album.
Yeah, and the thing that I got mad about with like some of the criticism of this album is it's like people would peg it, like one of the things I heard people say about it is that like, oh, Near My God, whatever, like sounds like Imagine Dragons, and I think while that comparison stings a little bit because it feels like there's a grain of truth to it, but really I think what that speaks to actually is the fact that the music that Imagine Dragons makes isn't bad because of what it in theory is trying to do, like really anthemic, euphoric, like rock stuff can be like one of the most compelling forms of music. Like U2, like at the peak of their powers, like certain members of this podcast, such as one Jeremiah, will testify that was some wild stuff right there. And like I think Near My God, like the song, and Imagine Dragons have similarities in the way that like Godfather and Scarface are similar. That doesn't mean they are two things of the same quality. You know what I mean? Like one of them is the Godfather, one of them extremely is not. And I think that's how it's like, just because they're reaching for this sort of anthemic sound doesn't mean that it's not good, because it's executed to like perfection here. I think Near My God is just like a straight up perfect like single and rock song, and like just works in that way that it immediately announces what it is and just grabs your heart and is like, we're singing this now, and you're like, okay, foxing. I
mean, folks, sometimes you truly want to be America's pool boy, you know? It really feel like that sometimes.
So
I can't believe we. Okay, I don't want to derail conversation. I can't believe we've gotten this far into the podcast without mentioning Grand Paradise. What are we doing, people?
Oh boy.
What? How? I mean,
Yes.
we can. This is gonna happen at some point. We need to get it out of the way. This album starts with a song called Grand Paradise, which has two of the best musical moments of 2018. First being the ooh-ah level like drop of the guitars that finally come in for the first time on this album with the shot caller at the gates to heaven lyric, which is the moment you're in for some shit. But then the moment you really know you're in for some shit is the musical moment of 2018, which is the goddamn key change at the end of Grand Paradise when you think you figured it out, but no, they all of a sudden there's pianos and there's gang vocals, and it's truly like one of the most like go for broke, like we're gonna shoot for the absolute like highest possible high, and they nail it on the first song. And that's really like the thing about this album is like they were so worried about sort of falling on their face going for this, and the fact that they managed to stick that landing on the first track really even lets you know like, all right, we're in good hands here. They're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk. They're really hitting these ambitious highs that they're striving for, and that gives the album this forward momentum at the start of it that is really crucial to its impact.
It pretty perfectly sets the stage for the rest of the album, which is just like a series of ceilings being set and then topped in a ridiculous fashion that you can't imagine a way in which the album gets more ambitious and more sort of raucous, but it continues to do so. And it continues to do so with like varied instrumentation and varied songwriting styles like we're talking about, but also in just like this exhaustive manner that in which it never lets up, and it just like continues that same energy. Obviously, like the breaks and the key changes in Grand Paradise are some of the standout moments of the album, but the idea of those moments of just being like, here's something unpredictable, here's something like that we clearly put like almost everything we had into, and like every song has a moment where it just like goes for broke, and some of the songs just like are those entire moments. I think Game Shark is something like that. The end of Slapstick is still like one of my favorite musical moments of the year. And then the build up on Lambert, just to like talk about how the album closes in the same way. The album closes with this just like racing and like super fast paced build to something like out of, you know, early The National type stuff, where it just like goes and goes and goes and goes and goes and spirals off the rails and goes out of control until it just like explodes in this finale for the entire album that really puts a great close on it, unless you loop back into Grand Paradise and just like slide into this never ending cycle of listening to Near My God on repeat ad nauseum.
It really is like a roller coaster where like you get to the end of it and it's like this incredible like cathartic rock experience, and then like the first minute and a half of Grand Paradise is like you've just gotten back on the roller coaster and it creeps you back up with that slow little intro, and it's like, oh baby, here we go again. Sign me up,
prognosticators call this the psychopomp effect, and being the only thing I want to do after I listen to Near My God is listen to Near My God again.
All right,
real
folks, we must talk about Jackson hinted at it, but we must talk about Five Cups for a brief moment.
Oh yeah.
Five Cups, which again, it's very similar to Grand Paradise. Where Grand Paradise, the entire album hinges on Grand Paradise, but it also hinges on Five Cups, where of course you have Grand Paradise. It is like, all right, we're gonna go for it's basically Babe Ruth pointing at the fucking stands and being like, I'm gonna hit my baseball there, and everyone's like, haha, Babe Ruth, you're not gonna do that. And of course Babe Ruth swings his bat, boom, lands exactly where he pointed. Five Cups is similar to that, where it's just sort of like, all right, the album is great up to this point, but like, you know, we're down to this is the centerpiece of the album, you know, like this is like, okay, things really hinge here, and they're taking a big risk. All right, 9 minutes long. It's 9 minutes, and it's a sort of ambient post rock, national-esque song where it's like, all right, we're gonna take you on a journey, and it's like, all right, Foxing, let's see what we can do. And you know what they do? Jackson, what do? They stick the fucking landing is what they did. They snapped is what they did. Holy shit. Five Cups, as I mentioned on the podcast awards episode, Five Cups is my favorite song on the album and is like top 5 for me in terms of songs of the year. If we're not counting like singles, if we're just sort of going songs, not worrying about singles or whatever. Five Cups, like, you have never experienced Five Cups. Truly, you've not truly experienced Five Cups if you have not been driving on the same roads that those Foxing boys probably drive on, and you hear those, I want to drive with my eyes closed, because it's like, 9 p.m., you just get out of class, you're fucking depressed, and you're like, all right, I truly want to drive with my eyes closed. I feel this. And the way the song, like I said, it's similar to Worth It in a way where it's like there's these tempo changes, and the song has these builds, and they sort of, the waves go down, then it's back up again. It's just sort of like the entire album sort of, put into this little, 9-minute box, and it's beautiful, and it's wonderful, and I love it dearly. And of course, then that track is followed up with Heartbeats, which is, again, these boys are trying to hurt me. Throughout the entire album, we can all admit this. They're trying to hurt us as hard as they can, and by doing Five Cups and then into Heartbeats, they're trying to kill me. These Foxy boys are trying to kill me. They failed, which is the big thing. They failed, but the scars of them trying to kill me are still very apparent, as Heartbeats is, holy shit. It's probably the most unique track on the record in terms of, it doesn't really sound like anything else on the record, where it's just like, it's a straight up indie pop track with drum machines, and there's not as much guitar stuff. It's sort of more string work and synth work, and it's so good. Oh god.
The fact that it manages to in its components be something that would, like you said, it doesn't share similar to this, but like Heartbeat sounds exactly like everything else on the album and fits perfectly with everything else on the album, despite the fact that it seems like it would be a departure. And that's kind of what this album does so well, is that no matter where it's going, whether it's like, all right, there are bagpipes now, all right, there's an ambient part now, like wherever they're going feels like part of that sort of cohesive whole, and the tracks sort of build off of each other well.
I'm curious, since we've like done a lot of, flagellating for this album on the podcast before. I'm curious if, for someone who isn't like as smitten with it as we are, if like the things that we're taking for granted as like obvious and very just like givens about this album are still apparent, and then like if they still connect, like when you're not just as obsessed with this project as we are. So for people like Dylan and Josiah, who like aren't as obsessed with this album as we are, like what the commendable aspects of it sort of seem to be from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably like the fifth or sixth biggest stan of this album on the pod. Like I like it, Yeah,
which
I
still
like
means
it
you
a
probably
good
like it a
deal,
lot.
and I admittedly feel a little overshadowed by your guys' just outright violent love of it. But yeah, I find it very enjoyable, and I have been digging into it more recently because we should note Jackson, AJ, and I are going to see Foxing and Japanese Breakfast in, I believe, like 15 days from now.
That is
at which
a very
point
small number of days.
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be violent. It's going to be just straight up inappropriate.
Yeah, at which point that shit will extremely be hidden. But I do think that like my emotional connection to this album has been kind of exponential over the last few months, similarly to the way Goodness by the Hotel Year did in 2016. And I know that I saw one person like draw a comparison between Near My God and Goodness in that they were trying to say that they're both emo records that received a lot of like fan acclaim the year they came out, and this person was trying to claim are both forgettable, and I fully disagree with that take.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of the whole emo stuff, like at least my personal story, I don't think it's the one that like it's not everyone else's, but like up until this album, I did not like Foxing at all, and it's especially made worse because they're hometown boys for me. Like they're from St. Louis, like they're from like where I'm at, and so the fact that I didn't like them felt weird. It's like, this is one of the biggest bands out of St. Louis, and I just don't get it up until this album, where really it's just like I didn't really like. I think was Dealer the one that came out before
Dealer's the most recent
album.
Yeah,
and Dealer, I just could not get into it at all. I was just like, this is like really like this is the big band like they're coming out of St. Louis, like these are the guys we chose. And then
I will say, however, even though I have admittedly not gotten like crazy into the Albatross or Daily whatever, those songs rip live. Like clearly, like people have always talked about Foxing being like a really great live band, and that being the way that like people tended to experience them, especially because they were a band that like opened for so many. Like there were a lot of chances you might have seen Foxing if you've been to an emo show like in the last however many years. And I got to see them on the Near My God tour, and not obviously all of the Near My God songs just go live, but like also I found that a lot of those other tracks translated better in their live setting along with those Near My God tracks,
which I'll agree with. Having also like I also saw them live on this tour, and like the songs on those previous albums sound so much better live than they do on record, just because there's a bit more of an energy to them. I would say, just for one, they've just gotten better at their craft.
Albatross has a lot of good songs on it. I just don't love the production on that album, which is fine because they made that album like however many years ago.
To speak to that idea, I had never been like passionate about Foxing before. This year, definitely, I was like aware of them, and they have like a couple singles that I really enjoyed. But they were one of those bands who would like come on the radio or come on like a recommended artist things, and they'd have one or two songs that I'm like, cool, I know what they do. Like their projects don't speak to me. It wasn't until like Slapstick came along. Slapstick for me was something that was like very different from the stuff that they were doing before. Like still recognizable as the same band, but I think the way that track builds and the way the track is structured is very different from the stuff they were doing before. And like the production was obviously much crisper, much cleaner, and like speaking to something else. And then, all through the first half of the year, I had heard like bubblings and murmurings that like, hey, this Foxing album is something like very special on the level of something like a Goodness or something even like a Worry or, like all of the buttons that were being pressed that needed to be pressed.
They were sounding the AJ alarms.
They were sounding the AJ alarms. And so I think like the reason that this album hits so hard is just because of like fitting into that narrative paired so well with what the album itself is about and is trying to do, being this album that is always giving its all and always like trying to forcefully win you over with its same like infectious ambition and just like in your faceness. And then to have that album come from a band that like, was a sort of like B-C tier emo band that was just like, no, you're going to fucking love this album and you're going to like stand this band with every like amount of your breath. You're going to like fall deeply and madly in love with this album. And like, just by its nature of it being like everything is so important, like life or death, fight or flight, just being like, oh, this album is so good, like you must defend this album, you must fight off the cowards who would dare to insult it with the largest sword that you can find. That's what this album sort of does. It gets you it's almost the inverse of the Daughters album, I'm now realizing, in that album takes you to sort of just the lowest, grimiest, angriest point. This album is so uplifting and so positive and like hopeful that it's impossible not to listen to this album and just sort of feel like empowered and enamored. And maybe that's where some of the like Kings of Leon, Imagine Dragons type stuff comes from, because it isn't explicitly like alternative pop, but it does have that uplifting anthemic. Someone had mentioned like all of these songs, sound like they were written for a stadium crowd and will never be able to be played there, but they do just have this like all encompassing positivity that can definitely come off as cheesy and like inauthentic to people, but Foxing are just giving it everything that they have, and there's no way to look at this album and say that it's not authentic or like doesn't have clear authorial intent, because I think that it certainly does, and it's apparent just like in every second of the music itself, and that's why I love the album.
And I think one of the interesting things that the album does, and like specifically I would say the song Near My God does, is it sort of draws like you were saying, like that desire to sort of uplift and that desire to be sort of love and to reach for those highs can be seen as sort of like desperate. But I think that Near My God does this really interesting thing where it sort of communicates, like Near My God is a song about them and sort of like the life of being this sort of middling mid-tier band where you're putting all your effort in this thing and you're playing like some okay rooms and you're making progress here and there, but it just doesn't really feel like the world is paying attention to you in this way. And like it could easily come across as being sort of just like, why isn't everyone love my band? But I think what it does instead is it taps into this thing that we all just want. It's like, do you even want me at all? Like that lyric is just like how all of us are just like going out into the world and just sort of wanting to be loved and be accepted, and the fact that they're able to sort of take that vulnerability and that weakness and turn it into this like powerful uplifting strength on songs like Nearer My God is something very powerful, and I think it is what speaks to this album's unique impact.
Mm-hmm. I think it's obviously no secret that a lot of the members of our podcast are college age, and I do think this is like the closest thing we've had to like in recent memory to the sort of college rock that like U2 is, as you guys were drawing that comparison earlier. Just kind of this small-ish band, at least at the time now, just shooting really big, and I think that like this record feels like a triumph in that respect.
I will say, though, it is very uplifting. Make no mistake, there are songs on this album that will ruin your life. Case in point, Bastardizer.
Hell yeah.
Ooh, yeah, that's the thing that this album does really well, is that like along with all the bells and whistles, toward the back half they're like, hey, you know what? We can just make the best emo song this year. We could do that too. And that Bastardizer is so goddamn good.
Like on that song, again, Connor Murphy says the word horny, and it's not terrible. It actually fits really well in the context of the song. You have to know the powers that this band possesses.
The powers, yeah.
that they can sing the words horny and it not be like this embarrassing, awful thing. It's just like,
honestly, yeah, you should read everything that has been said about the new 1975 album in its favor, and then just like scrub out
apply that to this album.
Because like this is like, you know, this is the album for the millennial moment. This is the millennial OK Computer. This is the album that kind of perfectly surmises like as a culture where rock music is and like what it should be like. Fuck all that other noise. Like this is where it's at. Near My God is that joint.
It also perfectly, in my opinion, so much better than the 1975 album does, captures sort of this, specifically sort of this millennial, like the experience of kind of coming into the world and realizing that the world we were promised just is never going to be there, and that kind of longing, and the way that this album is able to sort of overcome that and sort of find solidarity in themselves and in their music and be triumphant in spite of clearly being influenced by that is, I think, really compelling and is uplifting in the way that like only really good rock music kind of can be.
Yeah. In a way, this subject matter wise is kind of similar to the Daughters album, and it's just in the tone where it differs extremely, where this is more hopeful and uplifting, and You Won't Get What You Want is more
Connor Murphy
burn it all
and
down.
Yeah, Connor Murphy and Alexis Marshall have very different outlooks on the world, and that is how they are different. But similarly, they kind of, as an album, have a similar sort of way that they try to capture the world. Because like it isn't like this album doesn't really touch on any sort of like of the moment topics or anything in a similar way that like Near My God, like one of the powerful things about You Won't Get What You Want is the fact that nothing, even though it is so clearly of the moment, there's nothing that dates it. And I've talked about how I think that album is just going to age like fine. It's going to age like fine apocalypse wine to keep in your bunker as the world continues to go to shit, because it simultaneously captures how awful it feels now and sort of like a perspective future in the way that we're sort of headed. And I think similarly this album speaks to now without being like, and any of you guys any of you guys heard of some things that have happened recently?
You guys hear about that irony shit?
I mean, Jackson, I have to disagree. You know, I think the fact that Matty Healy says "Thank you, Kanye, very cool" on the album is going to make it a very timeless piece of art.
Okay, that part is actually good though. I like that line in the song.
When Foxing said "Rest in peace, Lil Peep," I felt that.
God, I think we've said all we can say about this album without just evolving into undecipherable yelps. Because this album truly makes me feel like that sometimes.
Whoop.
Yeah, I would like to shout out the Lich Prince in general, which we haven't talked about. But
Lich Prince guitar solo. Fucking.
That's what I was referencing earlier when I was
guitar
talking about the
solo.
riffs on Ocean Song.
Oh yeah, the guitar solo, but also the "I feel like a house plant," which is one of my favorite lyrics of this year. It's so good.
So yeah, I think that'll about do it for us for this episode. I think for
another
our list.
year in the books.
Another year, it's in the books. Come back in 2019. We'll have our first podcast out in sometime in 2019. When in 2019, who knows?
Before that, sometime this week, Dylan, Lily, and I are probably going to do a bleep cast where we talk about some of our favorite electronic releases. And I actually hope I'm going to try to see. I would like us to do some podding in January, because even though there's not going to be any music going on, it would be a nice time to catch up on other assorted bullshit, including I know we talked about doing a film late night, maybe once it's like kind of late January and everyone's seen the movies. We could just sort of do a movies late night or whatever, just palling around with our podcast. But
I also have a question for AJ. 2 questions for AJ, and then also one with Jackson that ties into one of these questions with AJ. So AJ, are you there?
I'm here.
When the fuck are you and Jeremiah going to record the Border Run Indieheads retrospect episode?
Look, I think with the Springsteen on Netflix special out there, we're overdue for a Bruce cast, and maybe with January being a slow month, we'll try and put a Bruce cast together.
Basically, it's like, AJ, I trust you. Like, I trust you can get it together, and I trust it's just a matter of, can you wrangle Jeremiah onto Skype to do the podcast?
But Jeremiah is such an enigma.
Jeremiah is literally he's a cryptid. Jeremiah is a cryptid.
Jeremiah is a goblin that we need to give all our gold for him to come back on the podcast.
We need to get like a comically large cardboard box and like a twig to hold it up, and then under it put like some Criterion DVDs and beer,
some
and
magic
Bruce,
cards and
Bruce Springsteen, and just lure him in, and then once we get him, then we get him to record a podcast with us.
The technology to properly wrangle Jeremiah Ogle has not been invented yet, but I'm trying,
And then also number 2 question for AJ, and then also Jackson. Benji Indieheads retrospect. When's that gonna happen?
I would. So we're gonna do it for the 5-year.
Oh yeah, I forgot that you guys are doing it. All right,
which I don't know exactly.
It's coming up.
I think it's in like March or April.
This year. It's in March or April.
It's February. I'm pretty sure it's February.
I'll look at. Oh, it is released on February 11th, 2014. So right. we will either do it in February or we will do it as an IRL pod. But I mean, we've been over the fact that there's just not a whole lot of time to pod at Pitchfork Music. Maybe AJ,
when you guys are all in Michigan for the Fox and Jay Brecky show.
When you come to visit, if you come through to Ann Arbor on Sunday, we could record Benji Cast live with you, me, and Josiah.
Well, the fifth anniversary of Benji is coming up next year, so maybe we'll time it around then.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you guys can record it and then we can put it out. We're getting to behind the scenes.
Yeah, we can put it in the bank.
We put it in the bank.
Well, you don't need it. We'll have content.
All right, we'll have content. We'll have content in 2019. Hopefully, again, but also just asking these questions is just like, I would like to do more Indieheads retrospect episodes, because we only have the one that I did with Armando for the Redeemer, and again, I hate having to start series with just like my. I was hoping we could make it a regular thing. We'll hopefully make it a regular thing in 2019.
It'd be like if I was the host of the podcast and the first episode of the Indieheads retrospective was like Perils from the Sea by Mark Kozilek and Jimmy LaValle. Like, it would be similar.
But anyways, yes, more content coming to you in 2019. Maybe one more episode.
Infinite content, baby.
Infinite content, baby. We're infinitely content.
Never ending. So hopefully, again, more content in 2019. Maybe one last pod end out 2018. Maybe the bleep cast. Who knows? Nevertheless, hey, be excited for more Indieheads podcast stuff in 2019, and maybe some sweet announcements on the way. Who knows? You'll find out then. So from me to you, and from the rest of the Indieheads podcast, a late Merry Christmas. Happy Foxing Day, and hopefully you all have a happy New Year if this ends up being our last podcast of 2018. Good night, folks. Goodbye. We will see you all
rock and roll
later.
Music with guitars. It's good.
It's good.
It's real.
It's good. Goodbye, everybody. Peace out.